Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today we're talking about all things Vite, and that's the French word for fast. And in the hot seat today, we are with the CEO or the founder of Vite. His name is Richard Yan. Richard, thank you very much for this update today.
Of course, Brad. It's great to be back.
And mate, it's interesting that you are in Beijing right now. You are in another office of the Vite, enterprise that is now building as a real and legitimate company. What's it like being in Beijing and seeing things unfold over there with your office? I can see some people in the background working late tonight.
Yeah. It's like this every night, actually. But so yes, I just got here from Silicon Valley. It's nice to be back in town in Beijing. We are now 36 people strong. We have about 31 engineers out here, or I should say 31 in the engineering team out here. Including engineers, product managers, QA, designers in the Beijing office, and we have 4 people in the Silicon Valley office working on operations. If you're interested, I'm happy to give you a quick tour of the Beijing office.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think the viewers and myself included would love to see if you want to take us on a bit of a tour, and we'll try and follow along. So for those who are watching now, we are lucky enough to have a bit of insight into the Beijing office so you can see exactly how things work in real time. With all of the interesting, experience of traveling around with someone live like this, you're going to see, what it really is, all the noises, all of the interactions, and all of the busy, I guess.
It's now 7:44 p.m. And we still got quite a few people working in the office. This is one part of our office. There's another section kind
Richard,
of
one of the things you could do, if you want to turn your camera so that we can see out from you, so in some way, because we're seeing mostly you.
Oh, I see. I mean, like this.
Yeah, that looks great. So talk us through the different departments and what people actually do, because, from our perspective, we just see people on screens. Talk us through the departments or the sections.
Okay, so our office is partitioned into 2 sections, and you're looking at one section right now. These are all the people in the engineering team. So it's now 7:44 p.m., so I guess not everyone's here, but it does look like everyone is kind of still here. So we got front-end engineers, back-end engineers, designers, QA, let's see, and here in the our management team is I think they're having a meeting.
Right.
Yeah. So this is actually our chief executive officer is in there, and then we have another office right down the hall. It will take a while for me to get there, so maybe I'll
maybe next time. But thank you for showing us that, because one thing that you've made clear is that in Vite you seem to be workaholics, because I'm Australian and we work hard, but working this kind of hours, you said it's 7:07 now. That's quite late. Yeah. And we had discussions before. This is quite commonplace to be working these kinds of hours. What time do people go home in the Vite? In the Vite startup?
So in China, there's this thing called 996. That means 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, and 6 days a week. This is actually quite normal, to be honest with you, with internet companies. And because we got this internet DNA, a lot of our staff members come from Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, Meituan of the world. So they're kind of used to this, I guess, this level of diligence.
Right.
So the other office I wasn't able to show you is our operating team in Beijing. We have 5 people in there right now. So we have a product manager that leads a team of 4 operating staff. So some focus on community management. One person does statistics. So so it's kind of like analytical marketing, if you will, right? So funnel optimization, conversion analysis, things of those sorts. Yeah, but that's in the other office, and I have to go into the hallway and then turn.
I appreciate that. Just time constraints. Next time we'll do that. Now, in total in Beijing, you have approximately 35. Is that what you said before?
We have 36 globally. So in Beijing we have 31 right now, and then 32, I guess. Yeah, Silicon Valley we have 4.
Okay. Now, let's talk about that. Now, why is it, if you're based in the Silicon Valley for the most part, why is it only 4 over there, Richard, and you have so many in Beijing? What's the draw card for having your engineers there?
Yeah, our tech co-founder and our CEO are both based out here. They both came from Meituan, which is Groupon of China.
Mm-hmm.
So they basically built a team around them as sort of the tech nucleus. Beijing is the Silicon Valley of China. So it's natural to have a team in Beijing if you're going to have a tech team in China. So the 4 of us in San Francisco Bay Area are focused on a few things: business development, marketing, and community management. So we are sort of the people that help evangelize blockchain, promote Vite in the non-China part of the world.
I see. But in that context, before we get into all of the details and discuss the updates, is the plan also to build out the enterprise in the Silicon Valley and also the engineering department there as well?
Yes. So we do have a director of engineering of Vite International that's currently in the Beijing office, but the plan is to have him go to the Silicon Valley office from time to time as well. And to the extent that we find talented engineers and technical contributors that want to join us in Silicon Valley, we're definitely not opposed to that.
I see. I did want to ask you though, in respect, and I don't mean to sort of infer anything with regard to cultures or anything like that, but in terms of cost purely, is it expensive to have an engineer comparatively in the Silicon Valley, and is it more cost effective for that reason to have the team in China?
Yeah, it's much more expensive to hire a person in Silicon Valley, aside from a much higher base salary to compensate for the high cost of living. There are also various taxes on top of that.
So was that part of the reason why the team's focused so much in Beijing?
I guess, yeah, you could say that. You could say that. But another big part of it is just that 2 of the 3 co-founders are here.
Okay. All right, well, let's get really stuck into this for all the audience, for all the viewers. This is specifically designed as a free update. There's no payment certainly on my part, and the idea is really just to allow you to have an insight into the inner workings, what's really going on with Vite and what's planned for now and the future. So let's just do a quick recap though. You are a next generation high performance decentralized application platform. It's a mouthful. We're not going to go through all of the fundamental tech as we've done before, but let's talk about the key point of being ultra fast. Do you still stand by that claim?
Yeah, we haven't changed our name, have we? So
no, you haven't changed your name, but has your tech kept up with that name? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so lots of things have happened since last time we talked, which is more than a month ago. Let's see. So number one is that we announced that our testnet, we call it testnet 0.1, it will launch in November. By many standards, I think already has many features that will allow us to even go push it into a mainnet, to be honest. But we're staying conservative. We're calling it testnet 0.1, and we'll launch in November. But there are a few other products that we released officially since last time we spoke. So number one, we have something called Vite Wallet on the browser, and also or a web version of the Vite Wallet. We also have an iOS app. It has been released in test mode, but it is downloadable from the App Store. So it functions as a wallet on your phone, on your iOS system. We'll have an Android version later. We also have a new version of the Block Explorer. So now this time it's a full live version as opposed to the preview version last time. We also released something called the Vite Store. So Vite merchandises can be purchased with something called the Vite community points. I'll get into that. So it's a real life scenario for using the testnet. Right. And lastly, we have something called the Vite Pay, which is a third-party integration software that will allow merchants to accept Vite or use the Vite payment network.
Okay, Richard, I'm just going to stop you there for a moment. I want to break these 3 things down so that we really get into them. Let's start with the wallet. I want to talk to you about that. Now, why is the wallet update so important? What's the fundamental reason for allowing for the online feature, the Explorer feature? What is it going to do for the user?
I think the key here is the fact that the testnet is usable at this point. So the number one thing we want a testnet to be able to do is to facilitate payment. And all this technology hinges upon the DAG plus snapshot chain framework that we have come up with. So DAG is something that delivers performance, and snapshot chain is the mechanism we put in place to make this particular variant of DAG more secure. The fact that the wallet has been updated and the block explorer has been updated are basically ways to showcase that the underlying technology is now sound to be used. Same thing goes with Vite Store and Vite Pay.
Okay, well, let's take it back because I want to talk about Vite Pay and the Vite Store in detail, but I want to move it back again to the conversation of the wallet in the context of why. Now, you've mentioned previously with regard to payments as the operative word. Now, there are essentially a few steps in the process you want to focus on. The first one is payments. My understanding is then you want to move down into token issuance, then DEX, and then move beyond that. So
Correct.
Let's focus, though, firstly on this aspect of payments, micropayments. Talk us through that. What's the plan with regard to payments and what you can do now?
Yeah, so I think a very important feature of us is that we have no gas. So to the extent that payments are used on a much smaller scale, for example, we're talking to some nonprofit organizations that are interested in issuing tokens on our platform and subsequently creating an opportunity for people to make payments denominated in those tokens. Then if those if there's a very high frequency of small payments, then obviously having no gas confers a huge advantage. So I guess that's one benefit of using our platform for payment purposes. But outside of that, you had also mentioned token issuance and DEX, and these are indeed our next steps. So if you were to look at the way we will be moving forward, aside from payment, we'll also be allowing token issuance, and next we'll be building our own decentralized exchange where tokens issued on our platform can be traded. We also have cross-chain gateway, so Bitcoin, ERC20 tokens, and USDT will be freely tradable on our decentralized exchange. And then after that, we'll have DApp. So smart contracts that take advantage of our asynchronous architecture will be available for deployment.
Okay, well, let's talk about the timeframes of those things as well. So what do you anticipate
Sure.
as someone who is leading the entire ecosystem? What are you expecting? What kind of milestones and when with regard to this, these steps you're talking about?
Well, so payment is, to be honest, fully functional at this point. So as soon as our testnet becomes live in November, token issues will be available. And along with that, we'll actually be allowing Supernodes voting, mining, and then DEX will also become available by the end of the year. In terms of our smart contracts, we'll have a partially working smart contract mechanism by the end of the year. We'll have synchronous version of smart contracts, and the asynchronous architecture will be added at the beginning of next year to basically complete our commitment to a new kind of smart contract framework.
I see. So everything's going to be done, essentially the bare bones by the end of the year. And then the asynchronous with the smart contracts and the influx of dApps will happen likely next year in the early phase.
DEX is happening by the end of 2018, but asynchronous architecture for smart contracts will happen early 2019.
Sure. Sorry, I may not have been clear. I'm talking about the dApps. So for applications.
Oh, dApps. I apologize. Yes, you're correct.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Okay. Well, that's quite a good roadmap, Richard, in terms of time, because there's a lot of different aspects that need to be built in there. Are you currently building each of those parts now?
Yes. We're very fortunate to have made good progress. We made some very key hires, and that's why our team is so big. Yeah, so I mean, as you can see, we have a pretty large office. There's the other office you haven't seen, so we're looking to perhaps fill a few seats in the other office as well. But the thing is that if you want to move fast, you basically have to hire the right people, and you also have to be aggressive about hiring.
Right. Well, on that note, I wanted to ask you about the languages as well, because you're using Go. It's a difficult language. It was even written up in one of your Medium articles stating that. So why would you choose something difficult? There must be a reason why you've chosen that.
Yeah, so because we're building a public blockchain, it is the infrastructure on which the apps will be running. It is the infrastructure on which these tokens will be issued. So performance is very important. And unfortunately, if you want to build a highway that allows many cars to run smoothly on it, you can't do it with Lego blocks, right? It's really easy to build anything with Lego blocks, but then they're fragile, they're not efficient. And so with that analogy, we chose Go because it satisfies our performance needs, even though it's not the easiest language in the world to develop in.
But is that going to be something that's going to be challenging for you with regard to adoption? Because it's a difficult language to interact with and to develop with. Is that something that could be a problem in the future?
Well, so to be honest, not really, because Go is the language that's used to build a virtual machine, right? So programmers will be building on top of the virtual machine. So they'll be using Solidity++ and not with Go. So to the extent that we are trying to attract community developers that want to develop alongside of us, they will also be using Go. Go is actually, to be honest, quite popular among quality, legitimate projects that are building public blockchains. So we're not worried about finding core developers that will also use Go along with us. But the app developers will be using Solidity++.
Right, and how different is that from from its original iteration with Ethereum and Solidity itself?
Right. So the key difference is the use of asynchronous architecture. And I know that's sort of vague. To give you an example, imagine you have two smart contracts. The first one has 10 lines, and then in line 3, that smart contract invokes this other smart contract. Instead of waiting for the other smart contract to finish before invoking line 4 through 10, the first smart contract can go ahead and execute lines 4 through 10 while simultaneously having the other smart contract execute.
Right.
And
so it's just building on the best of Ethereum and making it better.
Yes.
Language and also
yes. So So the key here is introducing an additional performance booster by having smart contracts execute simultaneously next to each other. The complication here is that we're making the programming a little bit more difficult. So basically, if you want to take advantage of this feature, you have to be you have to be aware of the complexity involved in taking advantage of the asynchronous architecture. Okay, otherwise, you lock yourself out.
Well, let's talk about that in the context of business. Now, again, in your article, you argue that development is key and focusing on that for now. But if you're a business and you're aware that there is some sort of challenges inherent with having developers work with this particular language, what's the real value, though, in having that parallel affordability?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So I would say in some ways we are providing tools to make development easier. In another sense, we're also setting a higher standard for taking advantage of this feature. So let me give you a few examples. So number one, we're allowing smart contracts to be updated. We're also putting together this has nothing to do with asynchronous architecture. I'll get back to that point.
Sure.
So the ability to schedule for a contract to be run. These are very fundamental features that we believe should be inherent in the SDK of a public blockchain, and they're not. So we're putting those in. Mm-hmm. So these are different ways we're making it easier for developers to make tools, to make applications. On the other hand, if you want the application to run super fast and you want to take advantage of asynchronous architecture, you need to be able to handle this particular feature. You need to familiarize yourself with the syntax, right? The syntactical complexity that goes along with this particular feature. So I would say on the one hand, we're providing tools to make things easier where we can, On the other hand, to provide this additional performance booster, we are setting a higher standard for the programming.
Right.
So,
hopefully you build in also an educational program so you can really support those, because you're setting a high standard. You want to be AAA. That's what I'm hearing from you, is that you genuinely want to set the bar very high for the whole.
Yeah. So in terms of programmer adoption, we will be providing a porting guide to allow them to turn any existing Solidity app into a Solidity++ app.
Okay. That's good to know.
Education material. Yeah. By the way, I also wanted to mention something before I forget. So number one, we will be removing a number of tokens off of ERC20. So what I'm referring to is the fact that we've issued 1 billion tokens. About 40% are being circulated today. They have been completely unlocked, right?
On how many exchanges? On how many exchanges currently is that unlocked?
We have OKX, IDEX, CoinX, and a few other smaller exchanges. Sorry, I should take that back. So almost all of these are actually unlocked at this point. Mm-hmm. But there's still about 55% of tokens still held by the leadership team and management or by the project, and we'll be removing almost all of those tokens off the ERC20.
Okay, I want to be really clear, because everyone understands. So over half of the total amount of tokens are being removed from the ERC20 standard.
So about a little bit more than half of the tokens are on the ERC are issued on the ERC20 network, and they will be removed from it. And instead, we'll be doing a one-to-one projection onto our testnet.
Okay, why are you doing that? And what's the value of that? Because that sounds like, to me, there's going to be an inherent degree of scarcity just from that action.
Yeah, so it's a major undertaking. There's a few reasons behind this gesture. So number one is we will be, this way, we will be encouraging people to start doing Supernodes voting, mining, and running full nodes on the testnet, right? So we basically want to move into this mainnet mentality, if you will. But we can't do that unless we have entities trying to assume the role of supernode. Now, how do you incentivize somebody to be a supernode? Well, you incentivize them with the way our network is structured. And that is, if you are voted as one of the supernodes, you get to forge tokens, right? We have a 3% inflation. All of that goes to the 25 supernodes that get voted to be the supernodes as they are. Now, but the thing is that if we're not in mainnet, how do we make sure that the tokens they receive actually have value, right? Otherwise, they're just play money, correct? So the way we thought about doing things is to basically move the ERC20 tokens that are not being circulated anyway into the testnet, and then we will allow so of the other 40% of ERC20 tokens that will still be traded, we would allow the holders of those tokens to basically project their tokens onto the testnet, take them off the market, and subsequently use those new testnet tokens to qualify to become eligible to be a supernode.
Right. So what you're doing is you're valorizing those ERC20s in the new testnet, essentially, and to really, and you're basically doing that to kickstart this system.
That's correct. That's correct. And then now, after we after our mainnet launches, we're going to do two things. Number one, any ERC20 tokens that would still be outstanding, they would be converted to mainnet tokens, and any testnet tokens will also be converted to mainnet tokens. I want to be clear about one thing though. Before today, we already have some testnet tokens, and they're truly just testnet tokens. And we're going to erase them. I guess what I'm saying is that we're resetting the system so that testnet will have a clean balance, right? Before we move our own ERC20 tokens into the testnet and before we ask other investors to move their ERC20 tokens into the testnet.
I see. So you're basically pressing the whole reset button as you move into testnet.
The reason why I say that is because after we released our wallet, we saw some very interesting crypto enthusiasts going into the wallet and take advantage of the obtain test token button. And they're just like pressing it a million times in order to get extra tokens, which is great because now we're getting real users. But we also want to make it crystal clear that those will be cleaned out, right? Before we.
So you're making it also fairer in the way in which people can accrue the tokens.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Now let's talk about burning. Are you doing any burning of any tokens of any kind in any way?
So what we're doing is we're taking a large number of ERC20 tokens off of circulation and moving them into the testnet. So that in and of itself is a kind of burning, and I call it a kind of burning because that liquidity will come back after we launch the mainnet, right? So it doesn't mean that they disappear permanently.
Right. So really, it isn't a burn; it's a complete transfer into a new structure.
Sure. But this will incentivize the project to launch the mainnet sooner, because then these tokens can become tradable then, right? As you know, we have a large amount. So we had, in our pitch deck, we announced a large number of tokens for the management team to be locked up for 2 years. We also have tokens for ecosystem development and marketing and so on. So it'd be great if we can get to those tokens and make use of them. But now we're just kind of making it public that we won't have access to them until our mainnet goes live.
Right. Okay. Now, so
that becomes a real incentive for us to launch sooner.
Yes. And what about mining? Talk us through that. The value, you mentioned the 3% inflation as well. That's really good for a miner, especially if they're moving towards a supernode, if they're interested. Right. So talk us through that, why that's valuable, and how people can, focus on that direction if that's their interest.
Once you become a supernode, you can earn up to 3,000 VITE tokens a day. And the way to become a supernode is to be voted to become a supernode. We'll have 25 supernodes, and we'll first reserve 5 for either the core team at Vite or someone we designate, and then we'll leave the other 20 to leave the other 20 to be selected by the community. This is in the testnet sense, right? Once we go mainnet, there's none of this categorization of one kind of supernode versus another, right? All supernodes will be equally decided based on the voters' preference.
Right.
And
the DPoS system. Correct.
And now, how do you attract other people to vote for you? Right. There are various ways to do so, but once you are voted, you basically, you have to be a full node, obviously, and then you basically verify transactions, once you get voted on to become a supernode, you would verify transactions, you would create blocks, and you would create snapshot blocks that would effectively ensure the integrity of the network. You have to have the top 25 number of votes in order to stay in that position.
Right. So let's talk about how also with regard to hardware, in terms of the mining itself, to maintain that kind of position, what would be required of someone if they want to go and try that?
The requirement's actually not very high. The minimum requirement is 2 gigs of RAM. Okay, and I am using a MacBook Pro, and I believe this has at least 8 gigs of RAM.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you want to run something on your server, it needs to be up all the time. So, one way of doing this is to actually reserve some space on, Amazon Cloud or Google Cloud. And I think the economics worked out to about 1,000 to 1,500 RMB a month. And that translates to, if you divide that by 6, it's like between 100 and 200 US dollars a month, right? So if you translate it into days, that's $3 to $6 a day.
Right.
But if you are the Supernode, you can earn about 3,000 V tokens a day, and that translates to about 100 US dollars in today's prices.
Yeah,
so
that's what I was referring to. That's quite substantial.
Yeah, so the revenue of 100 US dollars versus say 3 to 6 US dollars per day of cost.
Okay.
And obviously you have to spend electricity, but
sure.
Well, actually, no, that's not true. So because you do that through AWS or the cloud service, so you don't have to pay extra for electricity.
Well, you're certainly not paying the electricity bills of I'm not going to say names, but the first iterations of the blockchain we saw as much more energy intensive and much more expensive.
Right.
So with this regard, you are more efficient, in those terms.
Yeah, we're more green. So once you become a Supernode, you can definitely enjoy those benefits. We'll be coming out with more details about how you can apply to B1. Not how you can apply, but what are the things you have to do, right?
Yes.
What are the minimum requirements in order
we're gonna need that, Richard, because to be frank, it's coming. And it's an opportunity. There's Supernodes, there's 25. There's certainly financial incentives built into it. You've mentioned them. So we're going to really look forward to having that clarified in the Medium articles and all the updates. Let's now talk about the other two things we've mentioned. You have, in fact, is the Vite Pay first, and then we'll talk about the Vite Store. Talk us through the software. Talk us through really what this Vite Pay is all about and why it's such an asset.
Yeah, so I would say, to be honest, the true asset underneath the facade of Vite Pay and Vite Store is still just the testnet. The fact that it's built on high performance DAG plus a snapshot chain to help keep things in check. I would say on the surface, Vite Store is helpful because it is a real use case. So the fact that people will be redeeming things on the Vite Store for Vite merchandise, that will drive traffic, that will make use of the testnet. So any kind of claim or transaction per TPS will be tested in the real world. And then Vite Pay is basically the software that allows anyone to become a Vite Store, to do their own Vite Store. I guess that's the idea there.
Okay,
to be more exact, Vite Pay is the payment component that you would put into your own store in order for you to operate like a Vite Store.
Okay, so the Vite Pay is the software payment point of value for the store, but I want to talk about the token, because you have a unique token designed. And we need to talk about the name of this because, in the Medium article, it's called a currency, but it operates like a specific function and token and utility. It's called the VCP. Can you tell us about that as opposed to your other token and how this works in the ecosystem?
Sure. So VCP is something you can't buy. It's something we issue based on your contribution to the community. We have various campaigns out already on the China side. We'll be releasing them for all the overseas communities.
How will you do that? Will it be service-driven?
So an activity, for example, would be if you tweet about Vite, we'll reward you a small amount of Vite token. If you
That's a good rhyme. That's a good rhyme, Richard. It sounds got a good ring to it. If you tweet about Vite. Yeah,
exactly. One tweet, one Vite.
Right.
And then, articles, any kind of, T-shirt designs, or we'll also do these quizzes, right? Basically, various activities that make us understand you as whether you're a fan of Vite or you're make contributions, or you understand a white paper and so on.
But how are you going to cope with nefarious actions where people may not be as legitimate, where they may be just tweeting out information, or like how are you going to cope with people trying to work around the system?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are kind of professional bounty hunters out there. So we will apply a level of manual checking. So to the extent that we're looking at tweets, we always reserve the right of, I guess, rejecting entries that seem weird or bot generated to us. So I guess that's what we can do, but I'm sure we can't catch everyone. We'll just have to let that happen, because at the end of the day, we want a lot of people to use VCP. So if you're going to have a few bad apples in there, we're willing to live with the consequences and also find the good apples in there.
Okay. Well, let's now talk about the value point again. And we really want to make this clear for everyone. So you've got the VCP. It's titled currently as a currency, but clearly it's part of the inner workings of the ecosystem, so that it allows for
it's a voucher to redeem
a voucher.
Vite merchandise. It's not a currency in the sense that you can buy anything out there. It's not fiat.
Right, but that's where I want to go with this though, because you have built in a cross-compatibility with fiat. So can you talk us through how important fiat is for the merch to be purchased?
So to be more precise there, we don't currently have a fiat gateway. We're looking to do cross-chain gateway with Bitcoin, ERC20, and USDT, or other stablecoin offerings or products. So, but I don't know if we will be the one responsible for building out some kind of fiat gateway. But I think the closest that will come to is conversion with these stable coins that track the value of fiat.
Okay, so you're crypto focused now. How far along are you with the cross-chain collaboration?
Cross-chain will probably happen by the end of the year.
Okay, and what can that mean? Can you give us some examples of some of the merch that people can purchase at that point? Why would they want to buy it?
So a couple of things, right? On the Vite Store right now, you can only buy Vite merchandise. So I guess you have to be a true fan of Vite to buy the mugs, the shirts, the hat, for example. Mm-hmm. I mean, these look fabulous. I'm sure you want them.
I do.
But outside of that, we're also partnering with another company that is working to acquire between 50 and 100 merchants in Southeast Asia that would accept crypto payments. And their technology will be based on the Vite network.
So does that mean, Richard, that people will be able to buy specific merchandise that isn't just related to the blockchains themselves, but it'll expand out beyond that?
Oh, yeah. So on the second point that I made, this particular payment partner is going to acquire merchants that will be selling things completely unrelated to blockchain.
Can you give us some examples?
So recently we actually did a test of payment in Tokyo, and this was conducted by this company. They went to a chain called, actually, no, I'm not supposed to say the chain because it's not public yet. But,
right, okay.
But if you check one of our Medium articles, there was actually, I think about a month ago, we were looking to get volunteers to be interested in testing this out in Tokyo. So we wrote an article about it. So you can feel free to read that. But we did go to this chain with this partner, and we tested in-store payment on a physical POS machine. Currently, it's not powered by the Vite network, but the idea is that it will be powered by the Vite network. And then when it's powered by the Vite network, you can buy anything. And in this particular store, people were buying cell phone cases.
Okay, that's interesting. So
iPhone cases, yeah.
So paint us a picture, for just so that we can understand more of the utility in the real world. Let's move it forward 6 months or a year, just for a moment on this point. Tell us what you see in a year with regard to this store. Describe it for us so we can get an understanding of what we can do with Vite then, if your vision stands true.
Yeah, well, I think one key problem the crypto payment is trying to solve. So I used to have a small business, and when I used Stripe and I accepted credit cards, the fee imposed on my revenue was 30 cents plus 2.99% per transaction. So that really adds up, right? It's a huge amount. So with crypto, that fee will be much, much lower. And this is a single but extremely valuable, strong value proposition to merchants. So it really doesn't matter what the merchant's selling, to the extent that they can save a huge cost in terms of preserving the revenue. I think that would be a very important benefit that we can offer, and a very important vision of ours.
Right. Well, in that context, though, let's now discuss competitors, because this is where it gets really interesting. If we're trying to talk about the reality of the race that you're all in now, you're not all necessarily competing against each other. You are certainly in the centralized versus decentralized race in one respect. But is it because of your tech that you feel confident that you can move into this real world environment next year, and that you can be a viable business? Is that really what sets you apart? Or is it in fact, that the tech's not as imperative as long as that it fulfills your plan in comparison to others doing something similar perhaps with their own tech? Is the space robust enough for everyone to work in this context that's still currently doing DPoS, for example, at that high standard that you're doing? Or, are you really trying to take on be a front runner for the kind of business you want to accrue?
So I think one thing that we're really proud of is the fact that we are offering a holistic product. What I'm trying to say here is that I think a lot of projects have done a really good job of making something really sexy, differentiated, and interesting. But when it comes to making that product complete, make it shippable, right? Make it usable. I feel that what has currently been done leaves a lot to be desired. So to give you an example, if we were to use like a car analogy, like projects have come up with really fast engines or really cool looking, steering wheels or
a cool looking body.
Yeah, or cool looking body. But ultimately the car is only useful when it can take you from A to B. And so I think for us, yes, we do DAG plus smart contract, but I think our main selling point is actually not even that. It's more about being holistic and building something that is truly usable. So I think that will be manifested in both the smart contract in the long run, and also in just the token issuance process. The fact that you can issue a token on our platform, and you can also do fast payment on our platform, is very key. So, like for example, the block lattice ledger, right, which is a variant of DAG that we receive inspiration from Nano. So like that brings me back to Nano, for example. It's a very fast payment network, but Nano doesn't support smart contract. It doesn't support cross-chain gateway. It doesn't support token issuance. And because it doesn't support token issuance, there's no notion of having a DEX where tokens issued on the Nano platform can immediately get traded on the DEX. We do all of that, right?
Right, so, and you're planning on doing that.
I would say being holistic, the quality of being holistic is something we're very proud of.
Okay, so you've got the body, the engine, all the parts, you've got the driver, that's you and the team. You want to build it as a holistic framework. Let's now talk about, though, the users. And that could be other drivers, that could be the highway itself, that could be the entire, populace around the car in the community. What are you doing to sell this car? This whole holistic approach in terms of how are you going to get the people on board to use Vite?
Okay, so that's a great question. I think that this mining idea is actually very important. So we are going to launch a series of campaigns to make people aware of the fact that you will be able to start mining and becoming supernodes on the Vite TestNet sometime in November, right? So that's happening very soon.
Right.
That's number one. Number two is that we're also going to run these activities where we give out VCPs or V community points so they can spend on the store. But this is for driving general awareness, not specifically for people that want to mine and make money.
Okay.
And thirdly, we are also doing a series of offline events. So for example, we recently had a panel discussion in San Francisco. We were invited to go speak at a Google-hosted conference. Unfortunately, we had to skip that one, but I then was the speaker for an AI conference where I was the only blockchain speaker. So that was very interesting. I said, because I was kind of the odd one out, but there was a lot of blockchain curious people that I was able to form very good leads with.
But that tends to be more top led in the sense that that's the kind of associations that you build at those conferences are really with colleagues of the same caliber. But in terms of the lay user, do you think that those conferences have a very far reach and effect?
So yeah, you're right. So if you were to segment the different types of users out there, those conferences are more for perhaps forming business partnerships.
Right.
And
very important ones. I'm not trying to discredit them. They're obviously very important, but we also want to try and understand how the user is really going to be involved.
So two things, right? So if you're talking about, say, crypto enthusiasts that are really interested in the tech or just really interested in mining, they're professional miners out there, right? They don't care. They don't have to go to these conferences to find out about this, right? They just hunker down on Telegram, watch, your channel, for example.
Right.
So that's how we get to them, right? We need to tell them about the fact that Supernodes voting plus mining is coming.
Sure. I think it's really clear. I think what you've said is really clear. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to clarify this and get this understanding. So you have the mining mechanism. It's all coming in November. The Supernodes, the 25. But Richard, the thing I want to ask you is the question of SOV versus utility, because obviously the incentives are there to use it to accrue and amass because of the value. But how do we transition and espouse usership and interaction and trade? When does that happen? Does that happen next year once everything's built in? You have the Vite Store in place then?
So yes, we'll have a decentralized exchange by the end of the year. And Vite is already traded on various exchanges we talked about. So
but still, it would be still considered a store of value in a way because of the lack of purpose beyond holding it for anything but its value. So when does it start to transition into its enterprise value? In the sense of, obviously right now, I want to talk to you about this with regard to partnerships. So as you forge more and more business partnerships and relationships, you mentioned when you go to conferences, you're networking. So as you're building out more of these enterprises, and these business relationships, the whole point of the token is going to be so that you can interact in those ecosystems, and it really builds out the value of that utility. But right now, as people are considering, and they'll become aware in November, they can mine, they can progress towards a supernode perhaps, they're still thinking about it as a value, as a tokenized value that they can't really interact with in trade, much like with BTC at the moment. You can't really buy a lot with it, but you can certainly see its value. How can you talk us through the transitioning of it beyond just the store of value and wanting to amass it? I mean, a bit like a chipmunk with its acorns, and then wanting to be able to go and trade those acorns out and can see something for it as a product or a service.
I think that's when the Vite network has found perhaps a popular application, and we're working with a number of entities, right? I think I previously talked about a nonprofit organization. We're talking to a few city and local governments. We think that blockchain can actually be very helpful to drive transparency and take advantage of immutability in some of these government scenarios. I think that, but the Vite token is used to secure resources and TPS allocations it's like a ticket for using the network, right? So when the network becomes useful, then the Vite token naturally becomes more valuable as a result.
Right. So is it fair to say that as you onboard more applications, the inherent value of your token will grow because your ecosystem is growing, directly correlating with your, your token, or your design to build its value?
Correct. That's right. Although I will say that getting truly practical dApps to work is, I guess, something all public chains aspire to, and we're all making efforts to form partnerships, right? And I would have to say that besides the fact that some of these other more public blockchains have scalability issues that pull them back, there is an adoption problem, right? Because the user experience of decentralized applications aren't as good as centralized applications, and therefore the benefit of decentralization versus centralization does not trump the disadvantage in a less satisfying user interface. So those are problems that need to be overcome.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you on that note, Richard, which is a very important question, is that even if you could trump it with better performance in a decentralized fashion, is that even enough? Because if someone's attached to the purpose of the whatever they're using.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying decentralization alone might not be sufficient to change consumer behavior. But it's not just decentralization, right? There's also transparency and immutability, right? The fact that you can operate without authority is only one part of the, I guess, one part of the advantages being offered. So for example, as I mentioned earlier, with some government applications, like for example, West Virginia recently introduced e-voting for overseas veterans, and they did that on the blockchain. And I think a few national governments such as Austria actually issued bonds on the blockchain as well. So these technologies can actually be useful for in order to drive for offering immutability and transparency along with decentralization. So I think those benefits perhaps can be used to balance against these other user interface issues that we see now. But to be very honest, right? So the thing is that dApp is a long battle. It's a long war. What seems to be more immediate is simply the fact that the token can be used to power payments, right? It's fast, and and payment is a very large field. It happens very frequently, and there are use cases for payments by all kinds of goods in all kinds of countries. There are various countries with, say perhaps bad monetary policies where inflation is extremely high, where people gravitate more towards digital gold of some sort than their sovereign currency. And then I've seen a few other use cases where cryptocurrency so there are a few use cases where the chargeback rate of credit cards is extremely high because the users of those services, for whatever reason, tend to call in and cancel their credit cards. And credit card companies therefore increase their rate to compensate for this frequent failure in getting their money back. And as such, blockchain is helpful in that process because it's either you have your private key or you don't, right? If you make a payment, unless your private key is, even if your private key is stolen by somebody, there's no rollback.
It's very interesting you say this, because what you're really saying is that your primary focus right now is on that payment. I've spoken to a few other different blockchains. Stellar's one great example. They're very, very focused on their payment system. They want to be fast as well. Because it sounds like you're talking use case in that respect. You can see the whole point of this in enterprise frame first, and you can see proof that it will work if you get this formula right. With regard to the smart contracts, from what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like there's a bit of a question mark as to how this is going to play out. But what I want to ask you in that respect is, given the first step you're making with payments, are you confident with that alone that you can have some sort of genuine value in business because of the payment side? regardless of the smart contract aspect, you're going to have something.
I think so, because I think it's a very big field, and we have plans in place to be connected with stable coins, for example.
Do you know which one?
And I can't say at the moment.
But you do know.
But there's a handful. And to be honest, for any good business development, you don't just talk to one, right? You try to talk to all of them.
Sure.
And which you can probably count on two hands, to be honest. Yeah. And then you, aside from that, we are also, there are payment gateways that are accepting various tokens. So you talk to them.
And what's the kind of number you anticipate? I mean, it's a difficult question, but do you anticipate this to grow substantially and to grow rapidly in the next, we're talking right through the end of the year. So when are you expecting this to happen?
So the mandate for that company right now is between 50 and 100 merchants by the end of the year.
Right. Okay. That's substantial. What would that do, let's say, for Vite itself, for the Vite token? What's it likely to do if all that plays out?
Well, it's going to basically provide more use cases of the network. It's going to provide more use cases for the token. So I think it's going to be very positive. I mean, I don't know how to quantify, but I think the direction is very clear.
Sure. Let's now talk about the community itself. A lot of people are interested from what I hear in what Vite's doing, but they clearly want to know more and more about it. How are you allowing for them to engage? Are you ensuring that they get all their questions answered? Are you engaging with enough social media? What's your strategy?
Well, so there's both inbound and outbound. To the extent that people have questions, we are always happy to answer them. We've been very diligent about it. Our community managers are doing a good job. In terms of outbound, we're stepping up our effort on the offline game, the ground game, and also we're doing more social media sort of campaigns in order to drive adoption of the Vite community points, so that people will come and spend them on Vite Store. And also, we want to let people know about Supernodes voting and mining. And one way to broadcast that is through social media.
Right. So how's the feedback been,
And in terms of VCP, people have been responding very positively for that campaign, but that's only been released in China. That hasn't hit the overseas market yet. So we're going to release that.
Well, it's about to hit the blockchain. It's about to hit the West, that's for sure. And Richard, it's been a really fascinating discussion and an update. There's been a lot of tech discussions. I thank all the audience for surviving this long discussion, because obviously we've learned these things. We've learned that Supernodes are coming. We've learned that you're payment focused first and foremost. You've got these series of steps that you want to work through. The end of the 2018 is going to be really interesting, because much of your roadmap suggests that you'll have the fundamentals done by then to build out into the store. Lots of things are happening. You must be pretty proud of your team.
I am very proud, and I think they're all still here, actually.
Right. Is there anything you wanted to say as a final statement, in case I've missed anything at all with regard to the update?
I think we pretty much captured everything, but if there's one takeaway from this whole conversation, it is that mining is coming. Mining is here, so watch out for how to become a supernode and help us ensure integrity of the network. And this would be a great way to monetize that that server you have in your basement.
Right. Well, you've heard it from one of the core members of the Vite team. If you happen to have that 2 gig, certainly consider what Richard's saying and be aware, most importantly, that Supernodes, 25 of them in fact, are going to be up for grabs. And that means certainly, certain points of value. That means that you can come to understand exactly what the metrics mean, what the plan is when it all unfolds on Medium and other social platforms. So stay tuned for that. It's all coming in November. Thank you very much for the update, and I really look forward to finding out more about what the Vite team are doing, both in Beijing and in the Silicon Valley in the future. And thank you for your time tonight, Richard.
Thank you, Brad. Bye-bye.
Thanks, mate.